Welcome to The Dialectic. My name is Anirudh Garg, and today we're going to be talking about two Disney Pixar films, Encanto and Turning Red. As background, let's first cover Disney, because Disney is a behemoth. Old Disney movies really sucked, because the women in them kinda sucked. Most of them had no real personality besides swooning over a Prince Charming. And many of the women were weak-willed and they were very reactive to the world around them. Thankfully, this is changing in recent times. Women went from being doormats to side pieces, to coveted objects, to centerpieces, to maybe part of the solution. And in Milan, women became the solution. But in recent years, we're seeing this in a different angle. Women becoming the problem.
So woman equals what? Problem!
But there are two recent movies that really hit at home. Encanto and Turning Red. These two movies do a great job in centering women and the conflicts between them. They accomplish this by depicting the most empathetic stories of how women abuse other women. And they warrant a deep dive in the story and arguments made. Women hold up half a patriarchy. That's just a fact. They're socialized to do so. While under patriarchy, there is an expectation that men are the primary breadwinners. They're the ones who die in armed conflicts, and they're the ones whose lives we sometimes view as expendable. Women also have it rough. Women have the expectation of upholding culture and moral decency. Women tend to be far more religious than men, and they tend to be far more social. While men might handle monetary affairs, women would host Bible studies, organize PTA meetings, and volunteer in their local community. All social activities that hold communities together. They do so at a disproportionate rate. On the surface, there isn't anything wrong with this, right? It's just a simple division of labor to maximize output. What's the issue? The problem here is the same problem that arises whenever there are rigid gender roles. If there is a strict expectation that you adhere to these roles, then that social pressure will manifest in harm in the form of generational trauma. Both Encanto and Turning Red tackle the issue of mothers enforcing generational trauma on their daughters. They tell the story of daughters suffering the whiplash of both conforming to social expectations while being the picture of perfection. In Encanto, the madrigals are blessed with extraordinary gifts, and they use them for the betterment of their community. The magical candle, responsible, is kind of sexist though. The most useful powers end up in the hands of the women in the family. Peppa can control the weather and help irrigate crops. Luisa can single-handedly fix houses and clear roads with her strength. Mirabel's mother can cure any sickness with the powers of her cooking. Even Dolores has an insane power as the de facto spy master of her village thanks to her brilliant hearing. Her brother, on the other hand, has the ability to shapeshift. Not really much you can do with it. There is an incredible pressure on these women to serve their community. They live in a constant emotional and mental pressure to perform their duties. Even Isabella must use her powers to make herself and her surroundings perfectly beautiful. In a family of wunderkinds, Mirabel's lack of powers makes her stick out. She's not a superhuman who can fix problems with a flick of her wrist. She's just a 15-year-old girl. She becomes the scapegoat for the family's failing magic, even though she was the first to take proactive approaches to investigating it. She doesn't meet up to her abuela's expectations and is marked as the fall of their family tradition, even though there's nothing Mirabel cares more about than supporting and serving her family. Mirabel handles the jealousy and the pain that comes with being the black sheep with wisdom beyond her years and continues to do a lot of the emotional labor for a family that doesn't appreciate her. And that's not to say the family is cruel either. Everyone is dealing with the existential pressure to perform. If Luisa takes a break, houses will cave in. If Peppa doesn't gaslight herself, the whole village could drown. Heavens forbid Julieta decides to take a vacation from cooking in a town without a functional hospital. Abuela Alma is the reason why her family is hurting itself and losing the magic. In order to maintain the picture of perfection in this town, she has to be an abusive parent. But that abuse is human. She lived through the trauma of losing her husband in an armed conflict and being stuck raising triplets as a single mother. From her perspective, if the family isn't operating at max capacity, they risk losing everything once more. Ironically, that enforced trauma is what's destroying their house. Encanto sets up a very complicated conflict that then completely flops on its conclusion. Mirabel at least gets to see the events that shaped her abuela, and to the abuela's credit, she admits her mistake, but is forgiven way too easily. Even Bruno, we don't talk about Bruno, but Bruno was a guy who bore the burden of being the ultimate black sheep. He forgives his mother for turning the entire village against him. That type of forgiveness is possible to earn, but Encanto rushed the journey as a foregone conclusion. Real trauma takes years to heal, and that magic shouldn't return this quickly. The most fantastical element of the story is how quickly everyone overcame decades of abuse, not the fact that a 5-year-old wasn't mauled by his own pet jaguar. While Encanto has a dialogue about trauma, it doesn't give a satisfying answer about healing it. This is where Turning Red proves to be the superior movie. Mei-Lin is living a life many Asian immigrants can relate to. The movie opens by highlighting a major difference between Asian and European cultures. In Asian cultures, both Desi and East Asian, one of the most important duties you have as a child is to honor your elders, especially your parents. If you're an Asian immigrant, that pressure is magnified because the community you have around you is much smaller and much more concentrated. When immigrants come to either the US or Canada, they aren't always welcomed with open arms, and many are treated as second-class citizens and face violence from their peers. As a kid, you see your parents slogging to build a better life. They left the motherland and all its social comforts to give their children a better shot for the future. They left behind a family, a country, and even a language for you. When your parents do so much for you, what right do you have to disrespect them? How could you not work hard to honor them? The expectation to be an overachiever feels natural when you see your parents killing themselves to go above and beyond for you. If you're an Asian girl, that pressure is compounded by the burden you feel to keep your culture alive in a foreign hostile land. Mei-Lin assists her mom in running their temple, which is a node that connects them to their roots. As a surprise to absolutely no one, Asian parents are conservative. Their conservatism, like all conservatism, is born from a deep fear. That fear being that their children will sway away from their cultural roots. They worry about both their sons and daughters becoming westernized, but they worry more about their daughters. They hope that their son will find a submissive and respectful daughter-in-law from the culture that'll rein their son back into the culture, back into the fold once again, because women are expected to bear the brunt of social labor. One place where this is pronounced is in music. Mei-Lin's mother, Ming, is offended by hip-hop because it looks crass and degenerate to her sensibility. Mei-Lin must hide her deep passion because she's terrified of her mother's disapproval. If Mei-Lin doesn't repress her passions, shit hits the fan. BreadTuber and video essayist savant Big Joel pointed out a controversial scene where Mei-Lin's romantic drawings of an older teenager get discovered. Ming makes an outrageous scene at the gas station where the kid works and accuses him of grooming her daughter. This is embarrassing and kind of traumatizing as a kid. I too have been cock-blocked by my parents, and I felt every ounce of pain Mei-Lin felt in that moment. But Big Joel had the incorrect take on this scene. He said, and I quote, "I really feel like this movie has no understanding of the way the scene will haunt the audience and make me literally want to murder this woman. How is she actually redeemed from this abusive, horrific act?" He comes at this in a very culturally insensitive way, but we can't really blame him. The Asian experience is hard to understand if you're a white guy, even if you're a woke lefty. Being a woman in a patriarchal Asian society is a nightmare. If you don't have vigilant parents to protect you, thousands of creeps will chase after you, and many will try to groom you. Ming, no doubt dealing with the trauma of being a vulnerable girl, wants to ensure her daughter's innocence is protected at all costs, even if that means to infantilize her. Compound that impulse to control female sexuality because they are the moral center of your society with the maternal instinct to protect your children, you get this reaction. It might seem over the top, but it's common in Asian cultures. One other place where many Western audiences were perturbed was the scene where Ming loudly yells about her daughter's period and the need for pads in front of her entire class. And if you don't understand this and don't really apply the empathy necessary to understand it, it's going to come off as over the top, crazy, wild, completely unrealistic, evidently embarrassing. But let's be a little critical in the way this scene is depicted. When Mei-Lin was turning red, Ming immediately sprung to action. Ming immediately sprung into panicked action. She got pads, she got hot water, she got medication ready for her daughter pronto. When she found out her daughter was turning into a giant red panda, she was a lot less panicked. The whole panda thing was a lot less worrying to her than the running through traffic and over rooftops. Why is that? Why did Ming have such a different reaction to these two different types of turning red? They both are predictable and they both are somewhat manageable. To understand this, let's talk about menstruation in Asian cultures. Yeah, I'm a mansplain periods. This is the wisest decision I've ever made. It was not the wisest decision he ever made. It was one of the worst. It was the worst decision he ever made. Menstrual cycles are highly stigmatized in Asian cultures. In Indian culture, for example, women on their periods are treated no better than unclean vermin. In countries where access to pads, sanitation, and even toilets are scarce, getting your first period is traumatizing. I can barely imagine the pain and shame an 8-year-old must feel when she gets her first period and has no idea why she's bleeding, or the desperation a teenager might feel when she has cramps and a heavy flow without a toilet in sight, or how a pious woman feels when she's rejected from attending religious ceremonies at her temple during her cycle. For Ming, a period is a mark of shame and the struggles that come with growing up as a woman. At least when Mei-Lin turns into a panda, everyone wants to cuddle with her. We could easily imagine a young Ming feeling disgusted by her first period and utterly lost on how to handle this new challenge. This isn't Warhammer 40k. Just because the blood flows doesn't mean the source is respected. Ming was so traumatized by her experience that she promised her future daughter that she would never feel alone when her period comes. Did she take it too far? Indubitably. But Ming is not a monster. She's a mother who deeply loves her daughter and wants to do whatever it takes to ensure that she lives her best life. She pushes Mei-Lin's boundaries, and Mei-Lin, dealing with the difficulties of adolescence and being the model of perfection, doesn't know how to set boundaries or communicate them. Ming isn't doing much better. She lives in fear of her own mother, who has no doubt abused her in the exact same way. The grandmother is saddened by the distance between her and her daughter, which she wrongly blames on the panda curse, even though the panda curse isn't the cause of all these negative emotions and trauma, it's the symptom. Ming's constant overstepping of boundaries and Mei-Lin's inability to communicate results in a pretty badass fight between them. The fight parallels the fight Ming had with her mother over her relationship with her husband. This scene is very powerful because this is the first time that Mei-Lin's grandmother gets a third-person, almost objective view of the intergenerational trauma weighing down the family. And at her old age, she decides to break it. Just like in Encanto, Mei-Lin has a chance to confront her abuser at the source of their trauma. She can see the struggles her mother went through as a daughter balancing high expectations, and for the first time has a real heart-to-heart with her mother. Unlike Encanto, there is a real dialogue over the family's trauma and includes every member of the family. 3 generations, including the aunties, have a chance to reconcile and accept each other. They don't regress to the status quo. They accept a new normal, where everyone can be their authentic self. Ming learns how to accept her daughter's friends, interests, and boundaries. Ming learns how to accept her daughter's friends, interests, and boundaries while still playing the role of a protective parent. Both Encanto and Turning Red tell the story of young women living in families with high expectations. But the one thing they both do incredibly well is highlighting the crucial role men play in supporting their family. Bruno gladly accepts the role as the family punching bag so he can stay close with them and protect them. He might not get the respect he deserves, but the audience can appreciate his authenticity and his drive. Felix is nothing but supportive to his wife, who has a tremendous challenge of keeping her emotions in check. Being a panda is preferable to drowning your own family whenever you're feeling down. He helps in any way that he can, including having amazing dad reflexes to save his children. Augustine and Jin, though, they both steal the show. They both deeply care about their daughter's happiness, cultural propriety, and family reputation be damned. They are immaterial when their daughters are hurting. They want their daughters to live their best and most authentic life, and they will fight to make that a reality. Hashtag Disney Daddy Gang. It's no coincidence that Mirabel, Mei-Lin, Ming, the Madrigals tell us a story of maternal struggles and generational trauma between mothers and their daughters. These Disney films are powerful tools to educate young children on the intricate facets of periods, boundaries, and the immigrant experience, including the family dynamics it creates and the trauma it generates. Women have a tool to explain their trauma, and men get an example on how to support those women. And society gets the motivation to restructure its priorities. I'm glad that Disney is taking a woke direction in their storytelling. Not everyone will appreciate it. Most definitely some people did not like this movie, but it creates a dialogue on our most pressing issues and gives us a chance to empathize with different perspectives. Overall, both of these movies are great. If I were to rate them, even though that's not the subject of this video, I'd probably give Encanto a 6.5, maybe a 7 out of 10. Could have been higher with a better resolution. And I'd give Turning Red an easy 8.5 out of 10. They both are stories that do a very good job tackling complex issues. Maybe some younger children will struggle to understand them, but they do a very good job depicting the relationships between mothers and daughters and the struggles that arise from them, and ways that we as a society can work towards fixing that. This has been The Dialectic with Anirudh Garg. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Any support for this video to grow its traction will help me make more of this content and talking about a multitude of different issues. This is just one about films.